Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our Ritual Night Talk for January 1st, 2022. First Ritual Night Talk of the new year. I'm Scott Stenwick, your host for these Ritual Night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Before I get going any further, I want to do my YouTube spiel. I think I forgot that the other week. So, like this video, subscribe to the channel, request notifications. That way, if you like this content, you'll always know when we post a video, when we go live, when we do any of these events that generally happen on Tuesday evenings. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the greater ritual of the pentagram. We did the lesser ritual of the pentagram a couple weeks back, and I have included an article from my blog discussing the greater ritual of the pentagram. It's some of the material we'll be talking about tonight. And I've also included the donation link. No donation is too small. All donations go to support the operations of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis. So, as with the lesser ritual of the pentagram, I want to start off by reiterating that lesser doesn't mean less and greater doesn't mean more. Those points do get confused some of the time, especially in books where you have books on magic that are talking about like how kind of giving the idea that the greater ritual of the pentagram is like a better version of the lesser ritual of the pentagram, and that is actually not true. They are used for completely different things. Okay, so like I mentioned, the lesser ritual of the pentagram is a foundational ritual. It's part of what you would use to set up your magical circle, your magical working space. And by using the lesser ritual of the pentagram, lesser ritual of the hexagram, you get a field, which is kind of an area of magic that, conforms roughly to the bounds of your temple or circle. And that is a foundation for your work. It's kind of like the same idea of, in the grimoires, you're actually tracing a magic circle. But in this case, what we're doing is we're visualizing the circle and we're putting the pieces out there, using our magical intention, using our energy, breath work, and so forth. Now, that is not something that the greater ritual of the pentagram does. The greater ritual of the pentagram is used to tune the space. That is, you've got this general space that you've created now, and in order to work with a certain kind of magical energy, you're going to want to tune that field, just like you tune a musical instrument. So, if you think about it easily, like in the sense of like colored light. So it's like, okay, this is like white light, and let's say you want to do fire. Well, you want to turn the color over to red, right? Because red is the color for fire. You could think of tuning the space like that. You're taking your generic kind of white light space, and you're tuning it to an environment that conforms to the kind of power that you want to work with. And so what this does is this takes, your generic magical space and turns it into a specific magical space for a certain kind of working or operation. Okay? And with the greater ritual of the pentagram, what that is tuning the space to one of the four classical elements. Okay, there are also pentagrams for spirit, two forms, active and passive. Passive can also be thought of as receptive or magnetizing. And so you actually have, 6 elemental pentagrams, although, generally speaking, you're going to use the spirit pentagrams, along with one of the other elemental pentagrams, except in special cases where the ritual is specifically calling for you to work with the 5th element of spirit, and then that element has 2 forms. So the thing about this is that because what you're doing is tuning the space, it's like, well, you wouldn't start off with like a greater banishing ritual of the pentagram when you were going to do your magical working, because hopefully you can see that's not what the ritual does. It is, so you haven't really even created your field yet, and now you're going to try to tune something to a particular energy. Okay, and there's ways that you can use that, like in your temple setup, you've got a containment structure, and you want to put fire energy someplace, maybe, but really that's still more specific, and that's the kind of thing that you should really do if you want the best results within this foundational circle that you've created. You create the field, you tune the field, okay? And The lesser rituals create the field, and the greater rituals tune the field. And so if you think about it that way, it should be clear that calling it one greater and one lesser, even though they both use pentagrams, is not really accurate. What you'll also see is there have been people who make claims like, oh, well, because you're tracing it like an earth pentagram, you're going to make yourself poor doing the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. And you'll see that that's really not the case either, because when you look at how you would do a banishing greater pentagram of earth, that is a banishing of earth specifically. Okay, you're going to see that it is different from a lesser ritual, the pentagram. Not the same thing. Okay, and just because you trace the pentagram that direction, as you'll see, there are some pentagrams that are traced the same direction and do different things in the Golden Dawn arrangement of the pentagram, which is also used in the Thalemic system. So, the pentagram system that we use as far as, which pentagram tracing goes with which element, okay, is a little more complicated in the Thalemic system than it is in some other systems, like, for example, the Aurum Solus. So the Aurum Solus has a system where the pentagrams work just like hexagrams. So you could draw the pentagram. It goes spirit, fire, air, water, earth. Okay, and I'm going clockwise. I don't know. It might be backwards in the camera or something. But the point is that you can attribute each point to the pentagram to an element. So spirit's top, then fire is lower right, then you got air is upper left, water is upper right, and earth finally is lower left. And it's the earth pentagram. We start at the earth point when we do the lesser pentagram. But the thing about that is that in the Aurum Solus system, they just say, oh, start at the elemental point and go clockwise to invoke, counterclockwise to banish. And it's like, okay, so really easy system. Okay, it's a lot simpler than looking at the greater ritual, the pentagram, as it is in Liber O. However, I experimented with this for a couple of years, trying to see if the Aurum Solus pentagrams, worked as well as the Golden Dawn ones, and they don't. Okay, and I don't know why that is. Okay, because the system it's more logical, and it requires less memorization, but at the same time, it just seems like it doesn't work as well. Some people have put out the idea that some of that has to do with the kinds of forms that you're using. Could very well be, in the sense that you set up your field with the lesser rituals, and so kind of somehow encoded into that field is, well, they're just going to work better with the rituals that were developed along with them, instead of bringing a set in from another tradition, whether it's logical or not. Okay? Pretty pattern doesn't mean something works magically. You have to test it experimentally, and you always have to do that, especially if you're combining elements that don't normally go together. You got to test that stuff. So how the Thalemic version of the pentagram tracing works is you go toward the point of the element when you're invoking, and you go away from the point when you're banishing. So taking the earth pentagram as an example. Okay, again, also used in the lesser pentagram, but different god names in the greater ritual of the pentagram. It's not the same thing. Okay, so you got the lower left point is earth, and so to banish, you actually go clockwise with the earth pentagram. You're moving away from the point, regardless of the direction of motion. The invoking earth pentagram, if you remember, if you saw the lesser pentagram talk, this is used in the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram, starts at the top and it goes counterclockwise down to the earth point. So you're going toward the earth point when you're tracing, and then you just continue the thing all the way around. And then this is further complicated by the two forms of the spirit pentagram. So the spirit pentagrams, they start at the two bottom points, okay? But they make a cross in the bottom of the pentagram. So what you have is the point that connects the fire point to the air point, that's active spirit. We follow that around. And the point that connects earth to water, that's passive or receptive spirit. Trace that around. Okay? And so when you're tracing those, you have when you're tracing those, what you do is for active spirit, it's in this really bright kind of electric lavender. And for passive or receptive spirit, it's this darker purple. And if you go to the article, I actually went ahead and like made colored pentagrams in there to show you the colors of the elements, and you can look at, what they look like. It includes the tracings and so forth. But those two, they do this kind of cross in the middle instead of doing anything toward the spirit point. But what you're doing is you're going up, which is kind of toward the spirit point to invoke. You're coming down, which is away from the spirit point to banish. With the other elements, you have fire. Invoking starts at the top point, goes clockwise down to the fire point. Banishing fire is reverse, starts at the fire point, goes up to the top. Invoking air starts at the water point, goes over to air. Invoking water starts at the air point, goes over to water. And air and water wind up sharing a pentagram tracing in the sense that the banishing water pentagram is also the invoking air pentagram, and vice versa. So the banishing air pentagram is the invoking water pentagram. But they use different colors in the visualization, and they use different god names. And so they're not the same thing. And so this is the rationale that I use for talking about the idea that the lesser pentagram is actually not an earth pentagram. It's just traced the same way. But there are different god names associated with it, and different kinds of colors. Some teachers talk about doing it in blue. I like to do it more of an orange. I recently found a thing from Crowley where he's talking about how gold and yellow is how you should do it. And so that's kind of interesting that it's not blue. When blue was published in Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig, and that's kind of become the standard for a lot of people. Well, Crowley says gold and yellow, and I do orange. So like a candle flame is kind of how I visualize it, that sort of color. If you call it color orange or yellow or whatever. So when you're doing the greater ritual of the pentagram, so the first thing you're going to do is you are going to trace the invoking pentagram of spirit corresponding to the type of element. So what you have is you have air and fire are active elements, and water and earth are passive or receptive elements. So for a fire pentagram, you're going to start with the active spirit pentagram. For an earth pentagram, you're going to start with a passive spirit pentagram. And so what you're going to do that, and then depending on whether you're banishing or invoking, you're going to do something called the rending or closing of the veil. So the rending of the veil is like this. It's just part of curtain. Real simple. It doesn't need to be dramatic or exaggerated or anything like that. Closing the veil is basically just a simple hands back together. So you're parting the curtain, closing the curtain. There's a little bit of a discrepancy about how this is sometimes talked about online, where some people have put forth the idea in discussions that, oh, well, you do the closing of the veil with the passive receptive elements and you do the opening of the veil with the active elements. But to me, that's never really made sense. It doesn't really hold up to experimentation. It seems better that to do the rending of the veil when you're invoking, right? You're calling down the energies. You want to open that veil. And when you're banishing, to close the veil instead. So to me, that makes more sense, and that's how I do it, and that's how I teach it to my students. On the other hand, if you have your own way of doing it, I don't post these videos to be the magic police and say, well, the right way to do it is the way I do it. I don't do that. What you'll want it, but I invite you to try it and see how it works. See if it makes a difference. If it doesn't work as well for you, cool. Magic might not work the same way for you as for me, and go back to doing what you're comfortable with. But okay, so once you've done that, the rending or closing of the veil with the spirit pentagram, then you trace the pentagram of the element that you're working with, and you then retire in the sign of that element. And so what you're doing is, so for example, for fire, all right, so this is actually west, but let's say I were doing fire. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to trace the pentagram of active spirit. The god name for that is Ahaya. This is like a bright lavender electric purple. Rend the veil. And then I'm going to do the invoking pentagram of fire, which, as you recall, starts at the top, goes down to the fire point in red. And the god name here is Elohim. Elohim. And then what you're going to do is you're going to give the sign of fire. And the sign of fire is like this. It's a triangle at your forehead. Fire and water are both triangles. This one's fire, this one's water, down at your navel. And then the sign of air is the sign of Shu. It's like this, air holding up the sky. And the sign of earth is the sign of set fighting, where you put one arm up, one arm back, and kind of step forward and make kind of a diagonal. And so what you're going to do with the greater ritual, the pentagram, is you're going to trace this same figure to all four directions to tune your space to an element for practical working. And this is actually sufficient to do a lot of practical workings. People do start off with the elements, and there's this, maybe this perception sometimes, it's like a beginner thing or something. But actually, the elements and the planets, people seem to be more interested in the planets. The elements and the planets are both a complete system. And so within those symbol sets, you can do some of the same kinds of practical things. So, for example, fire would be for protection, also for cursing. So you've got some, Mars there, Saturn there. Air is used for healing, knowledge, stuff like that. So that's kind of like your Mercury. You've got Earth is like wealth, prosperity. So you can maybe think of that kind of like Jupiter or the sun. And then water is emotions, relationships. You can think of that as kind of akin to some of the things you could do with Venus or the moon. So these things do map together into a tight system. And the other thing about it is you're going to use the elements to do practical working. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you could just do that by calling on the angels of the four elements. You already know those angels because they're in the lesser ritual, the pentagram. And you can call those angels by the god name that is used in the greater ritual, the pentagram. So, for example, I want to do a protection spell. Okay, well, I can conjure Mikael, who is angel of fire, by the name Elohim, which is the god name for fire. And I can put together like a really simple just conjuration for that. You could trace the sigil of Mikael. You could find images and sigils in some traditional sources. You can also trace it on the moon Kamiya. I do that with some of my other elemental rituals. And that'll give you a sigil that you can use for the elemental form of Mikael. And then you can conjure Mikael just like you would conjure, any other angel, and charge them to, perform a task, maybe empower a talisman, really whatever you want to do. And within the realm of the elements, you really still do have the whole panoply of magical powers available to you. So that's an important thing to understand. Now, to the one other form of the greater ritual, the pentagram, and in fact the one that gets mentioned the most, I think, because of this kind of misunderstanding of lesser and greater pentagram rituals not being the same thing, is that there is a version of the greater ritual, the pentagram, where you do each element to the corresponding direction. So you do the air pentagram to the east, fire pentagram to the south, water pentagram to the west, and earth pentagram to the north. Okay? But that is not a souped up lesser ritual of the pentagram. What that is that is the form of it's essentially the Sephirothic form of the greater ritual, the pentagram, that corresponds to Malkut. Malkut, if you look in 777, it has the four colors, citrine, olive, russet, and black. And Malkut is properly the realm of all four elements. That's the realm of Asiya in Hermetic Kabbalah. So all four elements are attributed to Malkut. So to activate the mystical vision associated with Malkut, you do all four elements in a balanced configuration. And again, not the same as the lesser ritual, the pentagram. This ritual would be you're going to do your operate field, you'll do your lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, you'll do your lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, and then finally your greater invoking ritual of the pentagram for Malkut. It's important to understand that it's related to that specific thing. Now, in Thelema, the reason you see structures like that in other places, such as in Liber Reguli, you got the 4 pentagrams around of the different elements, and Liber Samic. Liber Samic breaks stuff up too, to the different elements. It's because the mystical vision corresponding to Malkut is the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel. Okay? And so other rituals essentially build on that 4 element structure to move, up the tree more properly into Tiferath, like where you're working with Liber Samic, in order to contact the Holy Guardian Angel. The vision of the Holy Guardian Angel is more like it's like an aspirational experience where you get the sense that, the angel is out there and the angel is wanting to connect with you. And then from there, you can do these other practices, working up the tree. So in the Thalemic system, you would do something like Liber Reguli. Liber Reguli is kind of like the Thalemic greater ritual of the pentagram for Malkut with some other stuff in it. And then you do that just daily, and you get to the point where you're ready to do the Holy Guardian Angel invocation. You switch over to Liber Samic, which again, it has the same structure with the elements. You're building everything up. It's the elevation of your consciousness on a vertical line, as how Crowley talks about it. And that vertical line is going to go from the elements in Malkut up into Tiferath. And in Tiferath, then, you're seeing the boundary between microcosm and macrocosm being breached by crossing the veil of Paraketh. And in that sense, so Samic is like the full invocation, and Reguli and the greater ritual of the pentagram with the 4 elements is like the preparation for that invocation, in the sense of preparing your mind for the vision of the angel. And Crowley talked about how, based on his interpretation of the Abramelin working, the Holy Guardian Angel is very central in the system of Thelema, and it's something that all magicians are supposed to be striving toward in the Thelemic system. I'm not as strict about that as some people are. Oh, you can't do any practical magic until you get your Holy Guardian Angel. I don't believe that. Practical magic is about sculpting your life into a way that it works for you, and just by virtue of setting up your life better, presumably you're going to be more in a position to truly invoke your Holy Guardian Angel. And so, to my way of thinking, it's like, well, then practical stuff that you need is just stuff you do. And so I generally teach people to go ahead and do the practical work that they need to do to get whatever they need to get fixed in their life, so that they can not only do the magical practice, but continue with the magical practice as a lifelong discipline. And that's really kind of the ideal of what you want. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate the version of the greater invoking ritual of the pentagram for Malkut, which is all 4 elements. And the other reason to do this one, not only preparation for Holy Guardian Angel work, is it's going to teach you all of the pentagrams that you need. And so, because you do each pentagram to its quarter, and that's you're practicing all of them with the colors, god names, and tracings. You can, if you want, as with the lesser pentagram, integrate the Enterer and the Sign of Silence with this. Although I find that's kind of awkward. And I find that this ritual works better if I vibrate the name while I trace, and then, give the corresponding sign to sit with the energy, and then continue around. The elements go in the microcosmic direction in this case, because we're dealing with the pentagram. The microcosm is the pentagram's natural realm. That doesn't necessarily mean that, pentagram rituals are entirely microcosmic, though. If you have set up your ritual space with your operant field, you have created a field that is macrocosmic. And then when you tune it with a pentagram, you don't change it back to microcosmic. It stays macrocosmic, but tuned to the macrocosmic element. So basically, this is what the ritual looks like. And I am going to go ahead and do this just to the corresponding directions. East is behind me, so I'm going to do the first one facing away from the camera. I like to do Kabbalistic crosses and stuff like that, facing the camera when I do rituals in these talks. So you can see how I do them. But in this case, it's just a matter of, I'm going to be tracing in the air pentagram with the air god name, which is Yahweh. Again, do not spell it. Don't go Yad-Heh-Vav. It's Yahweh, one word, or Yehovah, or some other variation. It's a word, is the point. It's a word of power, not a spelling of power. And so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to turn to the south, do fire, west, water, and finally earth in the north. So again, these are the microcosmic arrangements, just like the 4 archangels in the lesser ritual of the pentagram. And so, since this is the invoking form, I'm going to go ahead and do the rending of the veil. If I were going to do a banishing form, I would do the closing of the veil. But the banishing form is pretty rare. I don't use it very much at all. I mean, its primary application would be to tune a working space to anything but a particular element. And while I could see maybe there's an association for that would work, for the most part, I find that it's not really very helpful. My structure is invoke, 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 then conjuration, charge, license to depart for the spirit, and then I just close with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram only, to kind of release this thought form that you've created, out into the macrocosmic universe without sending any sort of a macrocosmic banishing after it. So this is what it looks like, and this is a version I'll be vibrating while tracing. You feel free to experiment, really with anything you want. Okay, but this is a good reference as far as how I do this ritual, and I've found it to be successful and helpful in my magical work. Now, there isn't really any preliminary to this. If you want, you could do another Kabbalistic cross at the beginning, but you don't really have to, okay? You've already done the Kabbalistic cross with your lesser pentagram, so I kind of feel like it's done, So the ritual just consists of doing pentagrams to the 4 directions and then just coming back to complete the circle, which you don't need to do anything to complete the circle besides just visualize the circle closing. And that is basically it. So here's what it looks like. And that is the greater ritual, the greater invoking ritual, the pentagram. Ways to remember the god names is you can kind of pay attention to them by color. It's not always it's not perfect, but it works for most of them. And so what you're looking at is you have, Mars is Geburah, that's red, okay, which is also the color for fire. The god name for Geburah is Elohim Gabor. God name for elemental fire is Elohim. Chesed is blue. Chesed is, blue is the color of water. And the god name for Chesed and for water is El, or Aleph Lamed. Okay? Yellow is the color of air. Tifereth is yellow. God name for Tifereth is Yahweh Eloah Vedat. And the elemental god name for air, also yellow, is Yahweh. So it's just the first word, but it's still the same name. Okay? And then finally for earth, earth kind of breaks the pattern because earth is related to Malkut, you trace it in green. That's one of Crowley's. That's one of Crowley's changes to the correspondences for the new Aeon, is tracing Earth in green. But essentially, you got these three, and then this down here is Earth, and the god name there is Adonai Melech or Adonai Haaretz, and so the god name for air is Adonai. And then with the pentagrams of spirit, the god name is Ehiyah for active spirit. That's the god name of Kether, so top of the tree of life, so, brilliant light. And finally, for passive spirit, the god name is Agala. And Agala is not necessarily map onto the tree, but it is the god name that is used in the northern quarter in the lesser ritual of the pentagram. So you can kind of think about it as Earth there. And it is true that when we're doing the pentagram in the north, which is over there, actually, because I'm facing this way, when we're doing the pentagram in the north, as with the god name for Adonai, again, you've got Agala there, which is used in the lesser ritual, the pentagram in the north, but it's still not the same pentagram. You've got two pentagrams you're doing. There's a spirit pentagram there, and there's also an earth pentagram there. And the earth pentagram is being done with Adonai, which is actually the southern god name in the lesser ritual, the pentagram, which I think, again, supports, my contention that these rituals are separate and they are different. You certainly can do both of them as part of your daily practice. You can, but the lesser rituals always precede the greater rituals, and the pentagram rituals always precede the hexagram rituals. So, what you could do is, you can do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, and then this ritual, the greater ritual of the pentagram, for Malkut, so all four elements. Then do your meditation, and then close with a Kabbalistic cross. And that's a great sequence that's going to help attune you to this holy guardian angel kind of energy that you want to work with eventually. One other point that I will make just very briefly is that one of the differences between the Golden Dawn system and the Thalemic system is that pentagrams apparently are used in the Golden Dawn system for signs of the zodiac by element. In the Thalemic system, the lesser ritual of the hexagram is used for the signs of the zodiac by ruling planet. So that's a change that Crowley made to the system. The other thing, just to mention briefly, is there's also a ritual that's used in the Golden Dawn called the Supreme Ritual of the Pentagram. It's kind of like buying more into that. And it's lesser, greater, and now it's Supreme. When they're different kinds of rituals, although the Supreme is kind of like a souped-up greater, but the greater is not a souped-up lesser. So it's kind of like, but anyway, the difference between that is the Supreme Ritual of the Pentagram, it's similar to the greater ritual of the pentagram for Malkut, but it also incorporates some Enochian god names and then tracing some zodiacal symbols and so forth as you're doing the pentagram. So it's a more complex ritual, and we don't actually use that ritual in the Thalemic tradition. We use the greater ritual of the pentagram, as I've expounded it here, to do Thalemic magic. And I can answer a few questions on the Supreme Pentagram, but I will point out I really don't work with it. And the reason I don't is so I don't do Golden Dawn Enochian magic. It is really, really practical and useful, I would think, doing Golden Dawn Enochian magic. But I don't do that style of Enochian. And I also am I have this idea if I'm doing Enochian, I want it to be like purely Enochian. Whereas in the Supreme Ritual, the pentagram, it's mixing together some Kabbalistic and Enochian stuff. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but to my way of thinking, it doesn't really line up with more of a purist approach to the D-Diaries. But if you're wanting to do this, the Neo-Enochian, the Golden Dawn system, the explicitly Crowley system, certainly I could see where that would be a useful ritual to not only activate the elements, but also activate the Enochian god names as they are attributed in that system. So with that, I'm going to sign off here. I guess I have the last two closing notes. There's more information in the article if you want to take a look. I've got images of all the pentagrams and with the tracing arrows and stuff. So it's a useful thing to study. So take a look at that. And so next week, we're going to be putting up the Capricorn elixir. So it's going to be an elixir right next week. But then after that, I'll get back to covering more of these rituals here on our Ritual Night Talks, Tuesday evenings presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the evening. Here is wishing you a wonderful rest of the night, and thank you very much for watching. Love is the law, love under will.